We'll start first intervention with Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining this second hour of today's meeting on red tape reduction, and also, as we have explored with many witnesses, the cost of government policies and the regulatory burden on businesses, which ultimately impacts Canadians and our economy. Mr. Boliogi, I would like to ask my first questions to you, seeing how you are from the University of Saskatchewan. Would you agree that investments in schools and students is important?
Oui.
Yes.
Thank you. Recent reports show that the Saskatchewan education system is paying over $200 million in carbon tax annually. Isn't that money that could be invested in student education and research, like the research that you do?
Les fonds peuvent être alloqués.
The funds could be allocated in a number of ways, yes. Those are public funds. It's politicians who decide how to allocate them.
Yes, in 2021, the University of Saskatchewan paid $3.7 million in carbon tax. Prior to raises in the carbon tax, this will rise to $12.1 million by 2030. And according to the 2022-23 operating budget of the University of Saskatchewan, operating revenue cleared operating costs by $17 million. With such close margins, does the ever-increasing carbon tax not threaten the existence of public institutions, such as the University of Saskatchewan, and the research that you yourself are conducting?
Je peux pas établir le lien causal entre
I can't establish a causal link between the carbon tax and funding to the institution and also funding for secondary education or higher education. That's not my area of expertise. So those are things that can be very well distinguished. You know, the political inputs and outputs are different. I don't have an answer for you. I can't tell you whether there is a direct causal link between a carbon tax and research funding.
But surely when a government is paying that amount of money in a carbon tax, or a province is paying that amount of money to the federal government in a carbon tax, that is money that is not going to fund programs within their own province. I understand that you have done substantial research into the impact of stakeholders on public administrators and policy formulation. And I'm wondering if you could provide us with your opinion on whether or not the current government does enough to consult with businesses of different industries and then actually implement the recommendations made during those public consultations.
Oui, j'ai pas étudié en spécifique.
I didn't study the specificity or specifically the current government. For me, it's generally an public administration course looking at 2021 rather, 2022. So I don't have any, or rather 2001. So nothing particular for this current period. Now, in terms of funding, there are specific mechanisms where all stakeholders who will be impacted by the regulation can take part, can be consulted. There's a form that is provided through public consultations. And it's quite well documented that large businesses especially, but businesses have very close ties with public administration when it comes to creating regulation. So that's one of the types of stakeholders that has the most interaction with government regulators, whether that's at the federal or other orders of government. What I've discovered in my research is that consultation with stakeholders, whether that is consultations that are done beforehand that are more bilateral or more open ones, the notice in common, both types of consultations can have an impact on the regulation. What I've noted is that when businesses show up, the only ones to show up at these consultations, they'll often be able to reduce the amount of onerous and undue regulation. So they'll have interactions with regulatory parties, and they'll be able to impact the amount of obstacles, because they are the ones that have the most information on their activities at the time, and regulators are better able to understand their points. And if I may continue.
Appreciate that. My time is limited. On the Johnson Shoyama website, it states in relation to your research, and I quote, his research challenges the commonly held belief that public consultations are, at best, useless, or at worst, another venue for corporate lobbying. Would you care to comment on that?
Just briefly, please.
Oui. En fait, c'est que
Yes, well, what I'm saying is that public consultations are more lead to more broad changes the broader they are. There's more of a diversity. What an issue that seems simple can become more complex and can lead to further government regulations. So, as I was saying earlier, the industries, when they are consulted directly, can get their points across more easily. However, when there are other stakeholders also, they can really come and complicate that. For example, if there are citizens and NGOs.
Mrs. Vignola, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Trudel, thank you for being with us today. In your business, how many people are assigned to paperwork, straight to paperwork? Well, I would say about 10 people easily. Just out of the 5 lawyers who work with us, 2 or 3 at least work on compliance, not just at the provincial level, but federal level also. It's often through corporations that, for example, CMHC, that the federal government will be involved. There are also a lot of consultants, even if I don't employ them directly as one of my employees. There are engineers also. There are all kinds of consultants that we have to work with. So if I add all the people who work directly on this in my businesses, plus all the consultants we have to engage with also, I mean, I don't know what the exact costs are, but we'd be talking about millions and millions of dollars each year that it costs us to comply with regulatory expectations and things that are complicated for no reason. Could you give us examples that show us the limits of compliance criteria, especially in terms of preserving heritage buildings? Well, lately I had discussions with people from the Development Bank of Canada. They're very dedicated. They do great work. They do a lot to help entrepreneurs in Canada. But there are limits. Often what I find is too bad in Crown corporations, and I'll say it in bad French here, but I feel like we've lost the common sense, or our common sense. Sometimes I see it in people's looks that people are trying to look for which of the compliance tables, you know, is it the 3rd tab, 4th paragraph, you know, that they can use to answer my question. I was talking to somebody from that bank recently, and we were looking at renovating this building, a specific building, at Place de Lys, and I asked them to come with me. They said that would be a good idea. And now they started explaining to me the regulatory framework. You know, there were 14 sub-questions and so on, and there's no little bit that deals with heritage buildings that we're restoring to their original, you know, their original state. But if you go through the eco-energetic route or so on, the green energy route and other ways, you know, maybe we can get to it. So now we're getting people who are helping us, public servants who are helping us get around regulation, their own regulation, to try to get the work done. I mean, that's a complete lack of common sense. Now, all of that, does it allow you as an entrepreneur to show innovation? You know, instead of destroying heritage buildings, you're restoring them. But that takes a long time. We need to thank you for your work because in North America, you know, it's as if everything's developed only for 50 years. Does this compliance or these compliance requirements prevent you from being able to innovate and do more? Well, let's take somebody, for example, work we do with the CMHC. It has done all it could do to support the housing market in Canada over the past few years. If it had not done all of that hard work, I mean, the situation would be catastrophic. Now, in terms of our projects, we take, for example, old malls, and then we take away bits of it, for example, parking lots and so on, and then we integrate it with a hotel, a worldwide hotel, or a university, or so on. And we're constantly seeing regulations that were not made for that because it's a new economic model during this housing crisis. That's right, to try to change the type of building that it is. So now I have to talk to people from the Quebec government, for example. There can't be too many retail spaces in the former mall business because we deal with residential properties. And so now there's constant compliance issues. And it's really, really too bad that there's no transparency. There's no transparency in crown corporations that we deal with. We're never able to fully understand how to get through this compliance regime. We get no answers. And sometimes I've even heard we are a crown corporation. We do not talk with private parties. I mean, that's really frustrating for us because that's millions of dollars now and that it costs us. And then I have like 10 people on this and then consultants also working on it. And I can never understand how to go forward on it. Often I say that if we took the model of the 12 works of Asterix, which is a comic book based on Greek mythology, then that would help us a lot. Thank you, Mr. Trudel. So if I understand what you're saying is that you're not criticizing the institutions themselves, but it's the steps. No, I mean, the CMHC, the BDC, they're doing such excellent work. And they're really important institutions for Canada. But there's an issue of philosophy, of transparency, and they're going to have to look at things from the client's perspective. So the CMHC, the Business Development Bank, the BDB, what are they going to do? How are they going to look at things? We're going to have to talk to entrepreneurs, or they're going to have to talk to us entrepreneurs to try to find solutions to all of this. Thank you very much.
Very much. Mr. Bachrach, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd love to ask some questions of Mr. Bilyogi. I hope I'm pronouncing that close enough. Bilyogi? Okay, I got a nod. There we go. Maybe starting out with a really high-level question. I think, the concept of regulatory modernization is based, in most cases, I believe, on this premise that regulations in our country are becoming more onerous and more complex. And I certainly hear from a lot of small businesses who are frustrated by the complexity and the requirements of regulatory processes. Is there data to suggest that that is the case countrywide, that on the whole, in general, Canada's regulatory environment is becoming more onerous?
Oui, c'est assez bien documenté là,
Yes, it's quite well documented rather. There have been efforts to reduce regulatory expansion. I mentioned a few during my opening statements. What we have to understand also, it goes back to what Mr. Trudel was saying, small businesses are more vulnerable to the regulatory load when it increases because they can't, for example, hire lawyers or so on. As I mentioned earlier, they have less access to regulators because it's often the big businesses that will be contacted because, at the beginning of the regulatory process, because when we start thinking about new regulations, usually regulators will think about the big players in the area first, and then NGOs and so on. That's where regulations can have a big impact also, is among small business owners. There's something that's also complex, but that we can see coming, is that society is also getting more complex, and so are markets. So I don't think we will be able to reduce regulatory burden on AI, for example, because we have disruptive new technologies and we need to adapt. So it also, things move along with society, but we also don't want to see over-regulation as we saw in the US. So every 10 to 15 years, there are studies such as this one to try to see how we can alleviate the burden, because we do need rules, but we need them to be done and made correctly.
I think your point about the differential impact of regulations on small businesses and large enterprises is a really important one. And I wonder if government's efforts at regulatory modernization should focus on those regulations that impact small businesses disproportionately. Is that a fair recommendation?
Oui, je crois bien. Puis en plus, les grandes entreprises.
Yes, I believe so. And often big businesses and companies also have contacts overseas, and they have entire departments to deal with international regulation. They have experts working for them. So whatever regulatory framework they are sent by the federal government, they'll be able to react. That's not the case with small businesses that have a harder time matching the regulatory pace, because that's not what they're there for. You know, they have clear missions, clear objectives. They don't have departments to deal with this or connections with the regulatory departments to see what's coming. And often they're not at the table when a new rule is created or changed. So yes, if there's modernization to do, and if the regulatory framework gets more complicated, small businesses that will pay the price.
I'm curious about regulatory capture. Could you provide for the committee a definition of what regulatory capture is, and also your recommendations for how the Government of Canada can avoid regulatory capture across the regulatory environment?
Oui, merci. Bon, la capture réglementaire.
Regulatory capture is when people creating the regulations they rely too much on certain key players to create the regulations. They'll get all their information from the same source, and that will create problems and will skew the regulation, and it will, for example, be used to create obstacles for competing businesses and so on. One of the easiest examples is, or things to work on rather, is transparency. We have to make sure that people know when certain parties are being consulted. There's also in the notice and comments whether the comments and so on are sincere. We want to avoid the appearance of a conflict of interest. For example, there's the Tigertine and other publishing houses. Some businesses were giving public administrators points for discussion, and the regulation was almost designed by business and by the private sector before consultations were held, and before other parts of the sectors could have their input. For example, NGOs. Those businesses that have very frequent interactions with the regulators, they might have an outside say if they are not sincere in their dealings. So transparency would help with that. Who did you talk to? How often? And if those discussions were held openly, there would be less of this appearance of conflict of interest when creating regulation. So transparency is the solution.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to our second round. We'll start with Mr. Gord. Mr. Gord, welcome back to OGGO. The floor is yours, sir.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mes questions vont être pour Monsieur Trudel.
Thank you very much. My questions will be for Mr. Trudel. Your testimony was like music to my ears. One of the biggest challenges we're going to have over the next 10, 15 years is going to be construction, housing, and so on. And it's true that regulation is very, very onerous. I would encourage you, if you're asked for money again, if you could leave your lawyers to get in touch with us and to tell us where we can reduce all of that burden. But how much do you think it would have slowed you down in your work? Have you lost years? Have you lost clients? Have you lost projects or open doors? Because we need a lot of them. Doors, literally doors. We need more of them in Canada right now. I mean, are there things that are slowing you down? Well, we're really looking at the number of years. That's how long things are delayed. How many years behind are we? I was looking at the media almost all day in the province of Quebec, in the Quebec area. One of the projects we announced recently, which again will be delayed by 12 months because of municipal regulations in this case, what we're doing is a new phase for building hundreds of housing units for over $200 million. And it's to help people with disabilities also. The CMHC decided during the insurance process to cut the funding by $60 million. I still don't know why. Thankfully, we were able to cover that amount. We were able to move forward with the project. But what's the consequence of that? That means that 3-4 years from now, when we get to phase 5, 6, 7 of the same project, well, the $60 million that we could have used then won't be there anymore. So now I have to hope to be able to go back to a second roll of funding with the CMHC, but that's not what it says. It tells me, the regulation tells me I'm not supposed to do that. Maybe I won't be able to reopen the case. Of course, I'm going to be charged many millions of dollars for a reanalysis of the same project. I mean, we spend our days paying fees and so on without knowing why. Now, coming back to compliance. From what you said earlier, I understand that you had a difficult time being able to find somebody who could take charge within the organization. For example, if it's not part of compliance or if it doesn't work within this regulatory framework, we don't know, we can't go this way or that way. I mean, it could be like a bank manager. You need somebody to be able to say, yes, let's go, let's do this way or that way. I mean, if when you have to manage so many things, I mean, well, I would go even further than what you said. I regularly hear, William, I know that's the right thing to do. I know you're right, but our rules, our internal rules, for example, at the CMHC, don't allow us to do that. What do we do? That's my question. Everybody understands that that's what we need to do. What can I do? I call up my MP. My MP says, well, I understand your problem, but it's a Crown corporation. There's nothing I can do. And then the Crown corporations tell me, when I call them up, they say, well, that's a political problem. I can't deal with that. I'm a Crown corporation. And then I talk to other people, and they always say they can't help me. I try to do different things, take different angles. I ask my architect to look at the project for an 8th time to try to make it fit within the regulations. And then, you know, we lose 2-3 years, and people don't have housing during that time. Does the owner's paperwork have to be reduced by 50-60% to make housing be built faster? I mean, people are going to end up outside, sleeping outside because there won't be enough housing. I mean, how much do we need to reduce it by? 50%, 60%? You know, if there's a 15-page form that it need to be reduced? Well, I'll give you an example. With the CMHC, if you have projects under $100 million, we have to obtain a special certificate. I understand why it's a rigorous process to try to get this license, but we have to show each year to the CMHC that we can do our job properly, and we have to have a risk analysis of our funds, our capital, and so on. That process is spread over 12 months, and then it has to be done each year. Last week, we finished the one from last year. It took nearly 6 months of analyses to provide us with a compliance certificate that lasts 12 months. And then I'm going to be asked questions in just a few months, and then I'll have I'll be there for 6 months with a compliance license that doesn't last that long because I'm going to have to restart all over again. Okay, I don't have much time, so perhaps I'll need the answer in writing, but can I get it in writing, please? Yeah, is it possible to build affordable housing in Canada now? It's possible, but it's very difficult. You have to find ways to do that. You have to work hard. You have to have a dedicated team. You have to work within your community, with the community organizations. It's still possible because we're managing to do it, but it's very, very difficult. Don't forget, each time that one of the 3 government orders of government rather, creates a new tax, we see it in the housing sector. For us, we count things in housing units. With cars kilometers here, it's housing units and increases the price.
We'll go to Mrs. Vignola for 2.5, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I really appreciate it. Mr. Tudel, we were talking earlier about the number of people you need to fill out the paperwork and some inconsistencies, difficulty reaching objectives due to these inconsistencies and the lack of communication. But in specific terms, for the common mortal coming to you, you know, the housing unit, how much more expensive is it per month? Well, it's a little bit difficult. Our internal team has looked at it a little bit. For example, all kinds of taxes, school taxes, property taxes, etc., etc. Now, there are certain taxes that at the federal level that have been eliminated. That's great, but there's still the TVQ in Quebec. It's no joke. There's a tax to get an elevator, and to get elevator music, that's another tax. Putting all that together, that's $500 rather a month, $500 per month per housing units that we don't get. That means that the first $500 that people pay us, I don't see any of it. 500, and at the $501st, I haven't even started building the first housing unit, and costs have doubled over the past few years. Now, in the Quebec region, there's a CMHC program that's an excellent one that has been miraculous. It has changed people's lives. It has really changed people's lives to have a brand new, great quality housing unit for people without housing. Now, to be able to build 2-bedrooms, 3-bedroom houses for families who have been reconstituted, or single-parent homes, families rather, I mean, that's very difficult. For $1,700, we have to build something very small because it's impossible to build something with more rooms, for example. The bank will never let us do that. So I've been trying to explain that to the CMHC for years to be able to change the system so that we can take, for example, single-parent homes and build them bigger homes, but nothing has ever changed. Thank you very much for your testimony. It speaks to the issues, and it's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mr. Bachrach to finish off the day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And one more question for Mr. Beaulieu-Gay. You talked about participation and the fact that small businesses and interested parties that perhaps don't have as many resources have differential access to regulatory processes and to advocacy around regulatory processes. So big companies are able to spend millions of dollars on lobbyists and influence regulatory change, whereas ordinary citizens, not-for-profit organizations, and small businesses have much less access. I'm just wondering about participation funding. When there are consultations or reviews of regulations that take place, should that be accounted for somehow so that government is hearing in an equitable way between large and small players in the environment?
Oui, ça serait une solution.
Yes, that would be a solution. That is to give them the means to participate. The most important thing is that they are able to participate early on in the process. For now, the consultations that are the most open and inclusive are at the end of the consultation process, the notice and comment section, where people have, 30, 60, 90 days to answer. And it's pretty much a done deal at that point. We have to allow people to participate before that point. That can be quite difficult because even the regulators themselves cannot know who's going to be impacted, all of the people who are going to be impacted. So, of course, they just turn to their network and people who they hear from often. And that means that we end up with people who informally are privileged. So I don't have a solution for you, but we have to find a way to try to include a larger diversity of participants earlier on in the process to make sure that small businesses, NGOs, and the people in general can have the word before the decisions are made.
Thank you very much. Witnesses, thank you very much for being with us today. We appreciate all the feedback and information you've provided for us. It's greatly appreciated.